Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Chase's Sports News. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today we are joined by a very special guest, a longtime ESPN personality, anchor, and host, one of the greatest ever, the man, the myth, the legend. You know who it is. On the right side of your screen, Mike Greenberg. Greeny, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Chase. It's a pleasure.
I'm so glad you're here to join us. As I told you before the show, you're just a host on ESPN with all the work you do, who I really idolize as I try to get into this industry. So it means the world to me that you're here speaking with me on this show. We've had a ton of your great colleagues on, and we're so excited to speak with you as well. Now, I want to get into obviously some great sports conversations between the NFL rule changes and the NBA and stuff like that. But I mean, what a career you have had across a ton of your different shows. It started with Mike and Mike. You mentioned on your final day of Mike and Mike that the show only stuck around because of word of mouth communication from your earliest fans. Looking back from where you are now, what were those beginning days like as you were just trying to build the foundation of who you were as a sportscaster?
Well, so the truth is that my career really began before that. My career began, I was working locally in Chicago. I went to Northwestern University, which is located just outside of Chicago. And then I got a job working in radio in Chicago. And I got very fortunate through a variety of circumstances that I won't bore you with. I wound up, when I was 24 years old, getting the job of covering the Chicago Bulls at a time when they had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, and they were coached by Phil Jackson.
Those are some good
And they
teams,
were,
I think. They won some
they
championships, right?
were legendary teams. I was there for the first three-peat. And everything I think I know about sports, meaning the inside of it, about what champions should look like, about what greatness is, I learned from that. I learned from Michael, and I learned from being around those teams. So that really was my beginning. That was before I got to ESPN at all. And those are the earliest days. And that's where I think most of what I do now was formed. If there's one piece of advice that I give all young people like yourself, it is when you get the opportunity to be around really successful people in any field, whether it's something that you are interested in or otherwise,
Sure.
pay attention, figure out what it is they do, how it is they got to be where they are. And I think I did a good job of that, particularly around Michael, to be honest with you. I was with him not every day, but pretty close to it for almost 3 years. And that I probably learned more lessons from that than literally anything else in my entire life. So when I think about the beginning of my career, Chase, that's really what I think about.
It's so interesting because it really doesn't matter what the profession is. I've had so many guests, broadcasters, and in different industries, even outside of sports, on this show. And something I find really interesting is a lot of the advice, as you just said, like a piece of advice you just gave, it doesn't exactly just fit the criteria of that specific profession. Oftentimes, greatness kind of is intertwined between different professions, and I find that really interesting. What you just said with Michael Jordan, on Get Up, you have a segment called the Green List, ranking the top 5 in any such category. Maybe some of those Bulls days come to mind. What have been the green list of Mike Greenberg's top career moments?
Oh my goodness! I mean, it's an excellent question. I would have to say, at or near the top would be visiting the White House as a guest of the President of the United States. That happened. Mike and I were invited in 2008 to then President George W. Bush had a T-ball game that he every single year on the White House lawn, and they had kids from all 50 states that played in it. And they of course it was the White House, so they made it into a very big deal. It was extremely well done. And one year they invited Mike and me to be the announcers, and then there was a dinner afterwards that my wife got to come to and everything. And so I would say being invited to the White House would have to be right near the very top. There was a talk show host who might predate you. Chase, I don't even know if this is a name that's going to resonate with you or not, but there was a legendary late night talk show host named David Letterman, who I grew up idolizing. And the first time he invited Mike and I to be on his show, and we were subsequently on many more times, that was one of the great thrills of my professional life, for sure, was the opportunity to meet him and to be on his show. That was great. I would have to say being around the Bulls, in particular, the Bulls played the Knicks in the Eastern Conference playoffs in 92, 93, and 94. I covered all three of those series. And sports have never been, in my presence, greater than they were then. I've never seen anything like that. The level of competition, the genuine rivalry, the genuine passionate dislike in only the best possible ways that existed between those teams, those organizations, those stars, Pat Riley and Patrick Ewing on one side, Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan on the other. That would have to be on the green list. I would say the first time I ever got to cover the Super Bowl, which is all the way back in January of 1993.
Wow.
I will tell you, it was the first of the back-to-back Dallas Buffalo Super Bowls. It was at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Michael Jackson was the halftime.
Wow.
And the final score of the game was 52-17, but it was still the most thrilling event I'd ever had. I don't know much of your story, except that obviously you're a young person who loves sports, which is great. So you're probably just like I was. When I got there, I was sitting in this media auxiliary seating. I was as far away from the field as you could possibly be, all the way upstairs. And I've never been more thrilled to be anywhere in my entire life.
Wow.
And if you've ever seen or been in the Rose Bowl, like the mountains are right in the distance and the sun is setting as the game is getting ready to start. And they do the anthem and the military flyby goes over the top. And I'm not ashamed to admit, I started to cry. I genuinely had tears in my eyes. And all I could think of was being a kid and loving sports and loving the Super Bowl and loving the idea of the Super Bowl. And oh my God, here I am at the Super Bowl. So that was the first really, really great, enormous, life-changing thrill of my professional life. So did we get to 5 yet, or is that only 4?
I think it's 4. All right, let's get one more in there. Love your stories.
I've got to do one from Get Up. Well, I guess I would say the first time I hosted the NFL draft. I've now been the host of ESPN's coverage of the NFL draft for the last 5 years. And the first year that I did it, that is my favorite event. I love the draft. I'm a fan of the New York Jets. So those things aren't coincidental, Chase. The draft is generally our best day of the year. But in all seriousness,
things go well.
Yeah, I mean, generally it goes. Things generally tend to go in this direction once we arrive in September. But I loved that event. I've always loved it. I've loved watching it all of my life, and to be able to sit there, it was in Cleveland that year, and to be able to sit there with Mel Kiper and Louis Riddick and Booger McFarland and Shefty and everybody, and be a part of the coverage of the draft. That was a bucket list item. So right off the top of my head, I would say those would be the 5 big ones.
I mean, Greeny, you just mentioned it. You love the New York Jets. I feel like, are very little people I know who love them just as much as you. I'm sure it hasn't always been easy to be a fan either. We're looking at 14 straight years now with no postseason berth after last season, where it felt like this team had Super Bowl aspirations. Where do you stand in terms of your confidence after this past offseason's moves? Where do you stand in terms of your confidence that the Jets will end that dreadful postseason drought sometime soon?
I think they have a chance. I really do. I think most. So here's where we were a year ago. I can't speak for all Jet fans. I guess I'm just speaking for myself. But I think speaking for me and most of the Jet fans that I know, we were probably unrealistically optimistic about the acquisition of Aaron Rodgers 2 years ago, and then last season when he came back healthy, or as healthy as he was. I think generally speaking, our pendulum swings a little too hard. Most of the Jet fans I've heard from are very down on this team. I'm not. I think we got the coaching hire right. We have a former Jet who was a sought-after commodity. I'm excited about Aaron Glenn. I have always been a fan of and believer in Justin Fields. I think going back to college, I went to Northwestern, as I said, so I'm a Big Ten guy. I pay very close attention to Big Ten football. Justin was a phenomenal college player. He had no chance to succeed in Chicago, and they didn't really give him any chance to succeed in Pittsburgh last year either. So I think he has a chance to surprise some people and play better than the expectation. The Jets should have an outstanding offensive line. Lord knows they have used so many high draft picks on offensive linemen. They better be really good. And there's probably nothing better you can have if you don't have a great quarterback than a great offensive line. And the Jets have a lot of really good players on defense. So do I think the Jets are a legitimate Super Bowl contender? Very, very unlikely. But do I think the Jets could be playing meaningful games into December and have a chance to make the playoffs? I do. And I find most of the Jet fans I know don't seem to agree.
I think a lot of Jets fans were just torn after, again, kind of maybe the sense of false hope with when you get Aaron Rodgers. But I think part of the reason, I mean, this team won more games when Zach Wilson was under center. I believe personally the Aaron Rodgers drama and what came with that was what derailed this team. I mean, theoretically, you add Devontae Adams. That was on paper a very, very good football team when you add in the defensive talent that you just mentioned. But I think the headache that was Rodgers in that locker room may have been where the problem stood. For New York, I mean, you talked about it on Get Up yesterday. We saw Michael Wilbon, recently talking about it in terms of Aaron Rodgers coming to Pittsburgh. They're in a very tricky position because they kind of don't have a backup plan at this point. Like a stable organization like Pittsburgh, I feel like you don't want a guy like Rodgers who could possibly ruin that. A team that's been above 500 all times with Mike Tomlin. But at the same time, the Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson alternative doesn't really sound too great either.
No, so just today, as we are sitting here and recording this conversation, there was a story that I think is worth paying attention to, and that is that Kirk Cousins did not show up for the first day of workouts, which are voluntary, but still significant, in Atlanta. And most people listening to this conversation are probably aware of the situation there where the Falcons signed him to this big contract, and then before you knew it, they used the 8th pick in the draft on a quarterback in Michael Penix. He clearly is going to be their quarterback going forward, and Kirk Cousins is understandably unhappy in his situation. They are hanging on to him, and I think it's smart because they know, and by they I mean the Falcons, someone somewhere is going to get hurt, or in some other way, like the Steelers, may find themselves desperate for a quarterback and might wind up trading Atlanta a little more than they might have otherwise gotten if they just released Cousins for nothing. So I think that's why they're hanging on to him, and I think it makes sense. So that feels to me like an option. If there comes a point where they just decide they need to cut bait on the Aaron option, then that feels like another reasonable possibility. There are other places. And if you look right now there are teams that have, Cleveland, for example, I know that's in the division and it's their arch rivals. Cleveland has a quarterback room. I'm not sure that they can fit all of the chairs in there. They have Joe Flacco, and they have Kenny Pickett, and they have Dylan Gabriel, who they just drafted, and they have Shedeur Sanders, who they just drafted, and they have Deshaun Watson, who I think it goes in a different category. He's not going to play this year, no matter what happens and whatever else. So, but those 4 guys, there's no way all 4 of them are going to be on the team, and that's just one example. There will be other options for the Steelers. So I think Rodgers is probably their best option. But there's going to come a point, I don't know when it is, when they're going to have to say, Aaron, it's time to fish or cut bait here. And I would be surprised if that doesn't happen sooner rather than later. But frankly, I'm surprised it's taken this long.
Yeah, I think when you asked Mike Tannenbaum yesterday, you're like, at what point does this stop? And he's like 6 weeks ago. So like at this point, it feels like kind of unknown when that will be the case. You mentioned Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland. You talk about how you were a key host for ESPN's NFL draft coverage. I spoke with your colleague, Matt Miller, on this show right before the draft. And he said, this year's top quarterback prospects, they were not as highly valued by NFL teams. Not even yourself, I think, saw Shedeur Sanders falling out of the first round, out of the second round, yet to day 3 to round 5. What were your thoughts on how the whole Shedeur Sanders saga unfolded?
Absolutely shocked. And clearly there's so much more at play here than the football piece of it. Because one, you could make a very legitimate argument that Shedeur Sanders was not a night 1 talent. I'm not an evaluator. I'm not an analyst. I'm just an aggregator of all of the opinion. I think most of the opinion was that he was a mid to late first round talent. If you wanted to tell me he was going to fall to the second round, that would not have stunned me. I'd have been a little surprised. The idea that he went when he went is flat out ludicrous. And what it has gone is it's completely transformed the situation. Rather than being overvalued, he was now ridiculously undervalued. He is a second round pick masquerading as a 5th round pick. He's going to be the starting quarterback in Cleveland. I will absolutely stake my reputation as a draft evaluator, of which candidly I have none, that he will be their starting quarterback. Wow. Maybe not week 1. Maybe Kenny Pickett, or they want to give that to one of the veterans, Pickett or Flacco. but I will be shocked if Sanders. I think what's going to happen is, here's my prediction, Chase. Keep up on this as it happens over the summer. When training camp starts, you're going to start hearing reports out of there. Browns very pleased with Shedeur Sanders. Sanders picking up the offense so fast. Browns pleasantly surprised with what they're seeing. And then he's going to get into games in the preseason and he's going to look good. He is a much better prospect than Dillon Gabriel. That's not in any way meant to disrespect Gabriel. He's not on the same plateau as a prospect that Shedeur Sanders is. Doesn't mean he can't wind up being a terrific player. But Sanders is a better prospect, is going to wind up being a better player, and I believe is going to be the starting quarterback for the Browns this year.
It's going to be an interesting situation because, as you mentioned, Deshaun Watson, we don't really know what's happening there. He looks like, just with him injured, he's going to be out. You look at Dillon Gabriel, just like you said, Sanders is a better football player than Gabriel. If he could beat him out, and then it's the two veterans, I personally think it could go to Joe Flacco, just with his experience at Cleveland, leading that team to the playoffs a few years ago. But we'll have to see. It sure will be interesting as training camp unfolds. Look, eventually in the NFL, particularly in the AFC, one goal is currently on their mind. Someone's got to get past Pat Mahomes. The AFC runs through Pat Mahomes. 5 Super Bowl appearances, 3 wins in the past 7 years. You have elite MVP type quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. They still can't get past this guy. What's going to need to happen? What's going to be the key for one of those MVP type guys to get past Mahomes in Kansas City and win a Super Bowl of their own?
Look, if they knew, they would have done it by now. The bottom line of it is that every now and again in sports, you get people like this. Tom Brady was like this. Michael Jordan was like this. That there are other truly great players. I'll tell you who else was like this. Phil Mickelson was like this. And there are others who had the misfortune of coming along at the wrong time. And by that, I mean having their prime coincide with the prime of Patrick Mahomes. I believe Josh Allen will lead his team to a Super Bowl someday. I believe Lamar Jackson will lead his team to a Super Bowl someday. Obviously, Burrow has already been there, and he'll probably get back. But the truth is, if Josh Allen were 10 years younger, he might wind up going down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Right now, his destiny appears to be a terrific player who unfortunately came along at the same time as this immortal, which is what Patrick Mahomes is very much on his way to being. I made a lot of comparisons during the Chiefs' run to the playoffs this year to Michael Jordan. And there were legendarily great players in Jordan's era, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, and Patrick Ewing in particular, who never won a championship, who will forever be remembered as great players without rings because they came along at the same time as Michael. And maybe, just maybe, that will be the fate of Josh and Lamar and Joe. Now, they're all very much young enough that they can completely rewrite this. None of them are even in the second half of their careers. They're like in the second third, So there's plenty of time for Allen and for Jackson and for Burrow to rewrite this narrative. But the way it feels right now, it is trending towards this being the Mahomes era, and those guys, unfortunately, coming along during Patrick's time.
You're talking immortal status. You brought up Michael Jordan a lot in this. And, you've spoken on the NBA GOAT debate a few times before. In 2018, when LeBron James was leading that Cleveland team that outside of him left a lot to be desired, when he was leading them to the NBA Finals, you said that Michael Jordan is not a superior player to LeBron James, though you have never outright said you think LeBron is better than MJ. I have to ask you the question, who's the GOAT, Jordan or LeBron?
So it depends on how you define this. So to me, look, you cannot argue with the accomplishments of LeBron James. He has 2 fewer championships than Jordan does. LeBron James is the NBA's all-time leading scorer. You look at all of the numbers that he has compiled, his assist numbers, all of the finals that he went to and all that. His accomplishments are the stuff of legend and worthy of being on the shortest possible list of the greatest players ever. No one will ever get me to say Michael Jordan isn't the greatest player of all time, because in large part because I was there and I saw it. And here's the way I will parse this for you, Chase. If there was one game of basketball being played and my life depended on the outcome, if my life hung in the balance and you said you can have any player you want on your team, I wouldn't have to think about it for a second. I wouldn't have to give 1 second's worth of consideration to anyone else, I would take Michael Jordan, and then I would plan a very long, healthy, and wonderful, prosperous future. Michael Jordan was the best. It doesn't mean he's the greatest. I don't know that Tom Brady was the best quarterback that ever lived, but he's the greatest because he did the most. If you want to argue that LeBron James, because of his longevity, because at the age of 40, he was second team All NBA this year, if you want to argue that that means he has accomplished as much on the basketball court as Michael did, that's totally fair. That's a different conversation.
Right.
But Michael Jordan, you just have to have seen it, and my son is 22 years old, and he's a huge fan of LeBron, and he always asks me, Dad, why do you always say that Michael was better? And there's just no way to explain it without having seen it. You just have to have been there. Here's another thing I'll tell you. This counts to me. This means a lot, actually, to me. Michael Jordan, because I was there, would play a Tuesday night game in New Jersey, back when the Nets played in New Jersey, would play a Tuesday night game in February in New Jersey like it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals. You've never seen anyone play as hard as Michael Jordan did in what today would be deemed a game that the stars of this day would be load managing. And there is something inside me that detests load management so much that feels important to me. Michael Jordan made every game feel like an event because in his mind, it was. And if you look back at Jordan's last 3 years in Chicago, so the years that ended in 96, 97, and 98, go back and look those years up and look at the games played. I can tell you right now, they're going to say 82, 82, and 82. And that means something. Michael Jordan, every game he played meant something to Jordan. And that is one of the things of his era that I miss the most. And I put that one as a huge check mark under his name.
Even as someone who obviously was not able to grow up watching Michael Jordan and instead has grown up watching LeBron James, I'll look back and I'll watch MJ, and there's just something about him, and it is that effort. It is that tenacity. I am personally a supporter that Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. And again, as you said, whether LeBron's accomplishments can overweigh that in a sense, who knows? But in terms of, as you said, if you get to pick one player to win you a game, I would 100% go with Michael Jordan as well. Look, we're going to wrap up this interview. We've talked about a lot of great sports topics. I do have just a few more questions for you in terms of who you are today as a broadcaster. You joined the Pat McAfee show when you first got the job as host of Get Up, and you explained that you believe only a select few of sportscasters have quote-unquote legacies. You have now definitely entered that select group, Mike. Even with all of your accomplishments, what do you want to be remembered by? What do you want your lasting legacy to become?
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I remember that conversation. I meant something very specific by it. You, because you are an aspiring sports broadcaster, the answer for you to this question may be yes. But I would ask anyone else your age, or most of the people listening who are about your age, do you know who Howard Cosell was? Howard Cosell was, by a wide margin, the most important sports broadcaster of his time and probably of all time. And my son, who is a huge sports fan, does not know who that was. So that's what I mean when I say you don't. The people who play the games, the ones I talk about, are the ones who are going to be remembered 50 years after the time. They're the ones people are going to write books about someday. You don't chronicle the lives of the chroniclers. That's our role, and so that's what I meant by that. As far as my legacy, I hope that people, and I hope I have a lot of career left in front of me, but I hope that people will say that I remained a fan. I am a journalist. I went to journalism school, and I do consider myself a journalist. But at the end of the day, my intention when I'm on the air, on TV or the radio or wherever it is you may find me, is to speak from the perspective of a sports fan. And I hope that I have given the perspective of the sports fan in a way that makes sports fans feel like they were represented in the conversation. In the sports debate, for the longest time, it has been or had been dominated by former players and athletes and executives and others. And there were very few of us who came right from the stands into the booth and started doing the conversation.
Right.
And so I hope that people will say, Greeny was a good fan, and he remained a fan, and he thought like a fan, and he spoke like a fan, and he spoke for the fans every chance that he got. That feels to me like a pretty good way to be remembered.
Absolutely. And I think that that is always a certain perspective is you do want to be kind of relatable to the audience in a sense. And you obviously do bring that energy, and that's part of what makes you so great and so entertaining to watch on a daily basis. I always end my interviews by asking my guest for a piece of advice. With you, Mike Greenberg, I'm going to word it a little bit differently. You mentioned in a 2021 interview that to you, intelligence is the separator between athletes and professional sports. In the world of sports reporting, what is the key separator that can take someone from good to great to legendary like yourself?
It's an excellent question. And here's my answer. And this applies well beyond this industry. This applies to any person your age, candidly, any person of any age. There is one trait, one characteristic that is shared by all of the successful people that I know and that I know of. And that characteristic is enthusiasm. I encourage young people, and that's why I'm so proud of you. I don't even know you, and yet I'm proud of you from having had this conversation with you. That you have taken the initiative to have this show and do these interviews and be doing all the stuff that you were doing at your age. It's going to serve you extremely well. And I can tell from just having had these 20 minutes that we've been talking that you demonstrate that enthusiasm. And the people who try to be too cool to be excited about stuff, they're the ones who don't get it. The people who are enthusiastic about what they do, about their passions, about their lives, whatever it is that is important to them, those are the people who wind up having success. And those are the people, I think, who wind up leading fulfilling and happy lives. So that is my piece of advice to you, which you obviously already understand, and to anyone else who is listening. Be unapologetically into whatever it is that moves you in your life, and you will find success, which can come in a lot of different shapes and forms.
Mike Greenberg, I really appreciate that. Enthusiasm is how I started. If I go back and listen to my earliest podcasts, that is what I brought. I brought kind of that sense of a fan energy, and the fact that I'm hearing it from you, I hope I can continue to go down this right path. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, even with all your, your busy schedule and all your different assignments. It means the world to me that you were here today to speak with me. And I wish you the best of luck on whatever the future holds for you. I know you have some books coming out and soon and stuff like that. So I wish you the best of luck with whatever is next.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. I'm extremely impressed, as I said. So continued success. Your future is going to be way better than mine.
I hope so. Mike Greenberg, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it. For the audience, I hope you guys did enjoy as well. Alongside one of the greatest hosts in history, the man, the myth, the legend, Mike Greenberg. I am your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News. Take care.